For me, it was all about finding that alignment between success and my values and my purpose. For me, the how really matters. The how meaning the values and making sure that I'm living my life through those values.
Knowing what you want, what's important, and finding a way to enjoy going through whatever the process is for what matters to you.
You're not going to be successful or fulfilled if you're living someone else's life, someone else's values. Ultimately, it comes down to finding out what truly is authentic to you. And one of my most important core values is like freedom of time and space and being able to spend time with those who matter most.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be talking about what do you do when you're in that part of life when you might just be floating. Like you might have recently changed jobs, lost a job, maybe you've lost someone you've loved, maybe a relationship has ended, but you're in that space where it's like what has been working, it's just not going to happen anymore, and it's time to do something different, and maybe you don't exactly know what it is. And I'm not here to just talk about that all on my own. I've got a fantastic guest with me. It's Darren. He's the founder of The Savage Leader. He's an executive coach. His company also does training, and they're focused on building great teams from the inside out and great leaders. The Savage Leader is his company that he founded, and it works with leaders and teams at Fortune 500s, mid-market companies, fast-growing startups, and visionary nonprofit. Darren is also the author of The Savage Leader, 13 Principles to Become a Better Leader from the Inside Out. It provides a blueprint for becoming a better leader. It's really a fantastic, easy read with like a mix of interviews, personal stories, and then sort of like practical tips so that you can actually implement it. Available on Amazon, I'm sure probably lots of other places. So I'd highly recommend it. So Darren, so good to see you again. We've actually chatted before, so it's so good to see you and connect. Yeah.
Yeah, great to reconnect. Great to have me on.
Yeah, so in your book there was one story that I kind of felt was a great, it's actually your 13th principle about, learning from your past stories. You have a story where you talk about, I think it was your senior year playing baseball, and like you had been so used to being kind of like almost a superstar, and you were definitely not a superstar. You kind of rode the bench, and I think you said like your last game was like kind of demoralizing because they didn't even let you hit. They like put you in right field, which I believe is the worst position in baseball or something, because it's like only left-handers like me would ever possibly hit out to right field, I think. So did you ever play baseball like competitively after that, or was that kind of like the end? So is that almost like a floating point? Because I know you learned the value of hard work from that, because you're kind of like looked back at the season and was like, I didn't really work all that hard, and you just weren't feeling it. So or maybe there's a better time in your life where you've sort of been in that floating space.
Yeah, no, great question. I would say been floating a lot of times, and that experience was interesting because I wouldn't quite qualify it as a superstar in baseball, but I definitely had success. One was on the all-star teams, was MVP of our JV team as a sophomore, and then for whatever reason, just didn't click for me in baseball. A lot of it was, the coaches weren't really that super inspiring to me, and coming out of that, I blamed the coaches, right? But it was really upon reflection where I learned, we were on equal footing. There were some major political dynamics at play, but I didn't put in the work to separate myself to overcome those political dynamics. And what's funny is history is kind of repeating itself with my son. But that experience, it was hard because I just remember sitting on the bench and just demoralizing. I walked off the field seeing these parents who'd seen me shine throughout my baseball career, and suddenly I was doing the opposite of shining. I was sitting on the bench, and which there were some benefits in there. I was able to reconnect with a lifelong friend. He and I were both anchored to the bench, but I always try to find the silver lining. But it was definitely a moment where it was hard personally, but to your point about floating, it killed my love for the game for a lot of years, frankly. And
Yeah.
from then for the next 4 or 5 years, like I didn't watch baseball, I didn't talk about baseball. I would definitely not pick up a ball because I just really had a distaste for the game that I had grown up loving. But it wasn't until in college where I had a chance to get back into it. Because I don't know what it was, but just sense like, there's a game I loved. Like, why should I let these two guys, these two coaches take that love away from me? And so I got back involved volunteering. And first I was helping coach a little league team. Then I managed the team properly the next year. So that was kind of my way of getting back into it and not just like letting the story of my past dictate the way I was going to live my life moving forward.
One thing that I was kind of curious about was, listening to you, reading it, and then now listening to even more of it when you talk about the coaches, is because one of the things that struck me, I'm like, I wonder if there was like a values alignment, back then that like part of you knew, but at that age, it's almost like I don't think I had any idea of what my personal values might be. Because I guess sports can kind of have like their own culture or their own whatever, a bit of they can be in alignment with values, I believe, too. Because I remember I'm a big fan of, George Carlin, who had this classic baseball football. And I feel like one thing you value a lot is like teamwork. And is baseball, is it really a team sport like a lot of the other sports, or is it really kind of almost like an individual that you like happen to do with other people? And so I was almost wondering if there was because you seem like someone who just loves teams, loves being part of teams, loves building team. And I was like, but maybe there was just a little bit of like that just wasn't your path. Like, and it has did other sports end up resonating more? Even if even to this day, you said you've kind of gotten into baseball a little bit after the fact. But I'm just wondering if other sports resonate more or other things, going to like the values alignment, which I know can be so important in things we do.
Yeah, no, great question. So, well, first off, so basketball was a sport that I immediately jumped into and I had
Yeah.
way more success in high school, which made no sense because I had way more natural talent in baseball than basketball. It's basically like the, 90s version of Bill Laimbeer. He used to play for the Pistons, like refs not looking, I'm giving elbows, talking trash. I was undersized, but interestingly enough, I mean, baseball, I guess one of my favorite sports because there's so much of a mental element to it. And yes, it's a team sport, but when that ball is up in the air, you're catching that fly ball late in the game. I mean, you're on an island. There's nothing anyone else can do to help you. Whereas in other sports, someone can actually help you in the middle of a play. And it's definitely like a individual sport when you're standing at the plate, when you're on the mound, when the balls hit you. But there is so much of a team element to it. And that's actually really hard as a coach. I actually am very neck deep in baseball. I coach my son's travel ball team. I coach the all-star team. I call coaching his little league team currently. And it's a challenge to get them to actually row in the same direction, to think about team, because so much of it and so much of society is around individual statistics. And so getting them to
Mm.
think about like what's the greater North Star, and sometimes it's putting the ball in play with a guy at third base that scores the run that, yeah, it didn't help them statistically. Yeah, they got an RBI, but I think it actually hurts their batting average. But to get them to see that is really hard in a world of individual stats.
I was okay. So there is this other level of strategy and thing like that yeah, because I've always thought of baseball really as more of an individual thing, but the things you mentioned, it's like, oh yeah, there is a lot more going on, and yeah, and so I can see now how that actually is in alignment with a lot of the work that you do. So kind of turning a little bit towards, that being in a place of okay, how I've been. In some ways, it's a shift of identity too, right? Of like, going from I was a to me, I still would say you're a superstar because when I had only played Little League up until I think I was like 11. Whenever after the first year, they let the kids actually pitch because I was left-handed and I got beaned like way too many times. So for whatever reason, I guess I just had like a real hittable body, and I was just like, I'm done. I was only playing right field. I was horrible at batting, so I'm like, this is not my sport. Yeah, that losing the identity and that right amount of going to the next thing versus maybe waiting it out and getting a little clarity. Because I don't know, something that kind of came to me is a little bit of life can be a little bit like going to the circus and the trapeze act, where the real amazing part is when somebody's in between the two. Is it a trapeze? Whatever the thing, the hold that you hold on to, and you're going from one trapeze to the other. It's like the magic is when someone's let go and they're in that empty space, and it's like, are they going to land the next thing? And
Mm-hmm.
but if somebody's just holding on to the one trapeze, it's like that's like the most boring part. It's like, come on, get to doing the cool stuff. And I think so. I know in my own life, it's always been like, okay, I want to make sure that when I go from one rung to the next, that I don't want to let go of that other rung. And more, I learned like to really get to have a cool next part of life, it's really requires letting go of a lot of that previous rung. And yeah, what have you found that's, worked for you, worked for clients, and sort of like that navigating that transition that I don't think we're really educated in our society and culture to handle well at all.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty big question. So I'll start instead
Yeah,
of
so
jumping into like
take it, chunk it, however you want.
no, it's helpful just because I think about and I've been in that space many, many times in my career, and it's been like a constant, I used to call it a constant career migration, constant career evolution, because things have changed. So for me, it's helpful for me to look back, like in the last chapter, looking back to tell, to make sense of your present and also help guide your future. But for me, I grew up in a very strong health science family. My parents are both veterinarians. I have to say it slow, not veterans, but veterinarians.
Mm,
My sister's a dermatologist and a human dermatologist, which is funny. People look at me funny when I say that because my mom is a veterinary dermatologist. And so
oh, okay, yeah.
sure enough, I wanted to be a human orthopedic surgeon because my dad's a veterinary orthopedic surgeon. So I realized halfway through undergrad at UC Davis that like med school was just not the path for me for a lot of different
Hmm.
reasons. And so I started this journey, whereas before I had this, yellow brick road of sorts in front of me. I knew exactly what was coming next. You got to take the MCAT, then you go to med school, and you go to intern and your residency, and then you become a surgeon, right? Like that's sort of mapped out, but it wasn't mapped out at all. And I found myself being intrigued by the world of business. So my best friend actually was sitting on the bench with me in high school baseball. His dad was a CFO of a very large bank and advised me to say, "Hey, look at consulting and investment banking. You'll figure it out, right? You get a lot of exposure." So
Uh-huh.
I did that for 4 years. Worked for Accenture. Then I realized this is interesting. Went to business school, did my MBA at UC Berkeley, and just came out and did a bunch of different things. And for the most part, a lot of the corporate jobs just lacked a lot of soul for me because there wasn't that sense of purpose. There wasn't that sense of giving back, which really tapped into that desire to be an orthopedic surgeon, which the use case for
Hmm.
that or the benefit was to help alleviate pain, to get athletes back on the field, and just to heal injuries. And so I lacked that. I started a nonprofit on the side to help fulfill this sense of purpose, but it still wasn't exactly aligned. And so I set upon this, I guess, this journey of sorts, which I didn't know, but for me, it was all about finding that alignment between success and my values and my purpose. And that's something that I call greatness. But it took me many, many years to even figure that out because I'm as ambitious as the next person. I have big goals for my life, for my career, for my business. But for me, the how really matters. The how meaning the values and making sure that I'm living
Hmm.
my life through those values. Because there's a lot of, I'll call them easier paths that are just, laden with success, titles, comp, logos, etc. But like for me, the values wouldn't be there, right? Go and do, I don't want to shine anybody, but like there's a lot of different professions I could have done and been very successful, but the how would have been lacking. So for me, the where I'm at there floating, if you will, was like doing things that like inspired me intellectually, but
Hmm.
didn't provide that sense of fulfillment. Maybe they were high level. They were, oh, cool, that's really cool. You did a project for company X, compensation, etc. But like the how was really missing, and like the values. Most people don't think about how; they think about the process and what you're doing. For me, the how is actually how you actually practice and live out those values while trying to strive and achieve success.
Yeah. So I think kind of what I'm hearing is that yeah, it's not just about, the end result because I don't know, there actually is no end. It is just life really just is process. And so there is no like there's no getting there. There's no there. It's like once you're there, then it's what's next. And so if there isn't you know, the process that's enjoyable, then it's never actually going to be enjoyable. I mean, it really, I do find it very fascinating how much stuff starts to agree whether it's, personal development, leadership coaching, or if we're talking like spiritual stuff, yoga and things like that, it really does get into like, you got to figure out how to enjoy what you're doing now and live in a way that, is in alignment with you now. Like there's no, oh, well, we'll do it tomorrow. Like, was it,
Yeah,
it's the old free beer tomorrow sign in front of the bar, and they're like, well, that's tomorrow. And then you come back the next day. Well, no, no, that's tomorrow. It's like that's today's
yeah.
the day.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting because I'm reading him in the process of three or two fundamentally different books. Probably not really. A lot of the principles are similar, but one is Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, and the
oh
other
yeah.
one is Jay Shetty, How to Think Like a Monk. And I might be totally messing this up, but in some way they both talk about having to enjoy the process of whatever you're trying to do, which is really interesting. And Mark Manson talks about that, like, hey, I wanted to become a musician, but I didn't enjoy the process of practicing and getting better. And so whenever I'm experiencing some of the bumps in the road, I go, maybe I'm not exactly where I want to be success wise, but the process actually, I don't know if I'd call it enjoyable, but learning to write better, speak better, to build better content, to facilitate better coaching workshops, one-on-one interactions, things like that. Like I actually do enjoy that part of the process. Like the impatience in my head, that's not very enjoyable because I'm not getting there as fast and at the pace that I want. But it's super important to like you said, enjoy what you're doing. To me, it's like the way I'm internalizing those messages, and I've realized it's so true, is you got to enjoy the process of what you're doing because it's not just about that end state, because there really is no destination.
Yeah. And I think one thing I've been learning more and more is that what's enjoyable in the process is going to be different from person to person. Like I don't know if you're familiar with I can't remember this, but it's Navy SEAL David Goggins. I think he got pretty he wrote a book, and I think he was very big a few. One of his stories is like I think he's actually in the San Diego area, I guess, Navy SEAL. He decided to, like, I think, run a triathlon without doing any training, and just, completely wrecked his body. But it's like his whole thing is kind of like mind over whatever. And to me, I'm like, I think that's just a ridiculous way to go about things. But I think, like, but there's the, like, knowing what you want, what's important, and, enjoying, finding a way to enjoy going through whatever the process is for what matters to you. Like, going through that was important to him, but, to me, I'm like, that's not the way. I would not enjoy that, his process, but I have my other processes that I enjoy. And I think that's sometimes things that maybe get lost in these books, is and I think you even kind of talk about this in your book, is it's like, make something yours. Just because somebody says this is the way that worked for them, don't just blindly copy paste. Like,
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in that. I'm obviously as a consultant, former consultant, is best practices are super powerful, but you got to adapt them to your industry. You got to adapt them to your life. And like you said, people have different processes for sure. And people have just different values, frankly, right? So,
yeah. So it's almost like one of the big themes that it sounds like, to navigating these times of change, of where we're floating, where maybe it really is like the values. And it's one of those things where I know, when I finally kind of figured out, like, some of my important values a couple of years ago, so much stuff became a lot easier, like, from dating to business. Um, yeah, I don't know. What have you found? But I know not everyone finds it easy to figure out what their values are. What maybe are some things that you found that let someone discover what their value? Because, so many people, if they were brought up a certain way, it's like, I value faith and I value family. Like, that, and sometimes it's like, sometimes people, that's their legit value, and then sometimes it's like, well, that's what they were told they should value. I think that's also something for people to be aware of, is like, you got to find out what you actually value. And I think you even mentioned that, like, values change over time. Like, what you might have valued when you were younger, you're not necessarily going to value now, and that's okay. I think sometimes we think, oh, we can't change. It's like, no, we're supposed to change.
yeah, purpose is a word that I've struggled with for a long time, and just because I feel like for the most part it feels inaccessible for folks. They feel like they have to have the David Goggins story, they have to have the near-death experience, they have to have this transformational moment, this trip, or walking some trail or hiking some, climbing some mountain or whatnot.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, we do something similar, probably Simon Sinek does it as well. It's just like getting an understanding of who people are, hearing their stories, what's a defining moment in your life, asking them more outright, like, what's your most important personal, professional value? Um, what do you want your personal, professional legacy to be? And using stories to extract the themes and the words and the values from people. At the same time, tuning out the noise of family and friends and the media and social media in particular, of like what they think your values should be, because it's like you're not going to be successful or fulfilled if you're living someone else's life, someone else's values. Ultimately, it comes down to finding out what
Hmm.
truly is authentic to you, and it takes a long time and a lot of reflection too. I mean, I think introspection, reflection, not pushing those things aside is really helpful. I mean, living in the south of Brazil. I talked about this in the book, starting my first company, a surf travel company in a beautiful town of Florianopolis, Brazil, is what I took away from that, beyond the entrepreneurship, beyond learning Portuguese, beyond starting and meeting new friends, is like I realized that one of my most important core values is like freedom of time and space, and being able to spend time with those who matter most. And so at the time, it was my girlfriend, to actually fiance then, and then now wife, mother of my two kids. And so now it's about spending time with my family. Like, so those values come up over time. I try to accelerate the process in like a workshop format where we tell these stories and obviously use some introspection up front of the workshop to bring stories into it and to pull those values out, because otherwise it's hard, right? It's like I'm just going to pull
Yeah.
down words that sound good. Same thing goes with corporate cultures, right? Where
Hmm.
they pull these words that really sound good. They're aspirational. They're what shareholders or want customers or what employees want to hear. But like if they're
Yeah.
not really true and authentic to the ethos and soul of the company, you're not going to be
Yeah.
successful. It's like, how do you actually see those being lived out in your life?
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I find it funny in a lot of companies, they'll have a value of like accountability or integrity. And it's just like, well, that's clearly not actually a real value based off of how the company operates. But I like how you mentioned stories, because I'm thinking about how often I can tell what other people's values are based off of how they behave. They might say like, oh, I'm this way, and it's like, well, the fact that you show up late all the time without saying anything shows that like you don't value communication, or I don't
Respecting
say this.
others.
Right. I don't say this to these people because it's like, well, I'm not here to change somebody unless they opt into wanting to. But yeah, I think this kind of goes into like, what's the good value of having like, a good friend, and if you don't have a good friend, find a good coach that you can tell your story to, and then they can probably reflect back like, well, it sounds like maybe you value your freedom and you value this thing, because not everybody's going to be able to have that ability to see themselves from the get-go. I'm sure you've spent a lot of time learning to cultivate it yourself, and then I'm sure that's something you help your clients a lot with. But I don't think I've ever thought of that way of getting people's stories as a way to elicit values, because it's how we live is a reflection, regardless of what we say. It's like what actually happens in our lives. It's our values playing out, right? And so if we're conscious of them, then we can consciously sort of work our story, I believe.
Yeah, or maybe not playing out. Not everyone is living out their values. They may find that the way they live their life is completely contradictory of their values. And so one of the things that we do once we've defined this, like what we call personal greatness statement, which is like the alignment of purpose and success, is I'll
Yeah.
ask them to reflect on the last month or last week, whatever the time frame is how do your actions, behaviors, and decisions align with that sense of greatness? And so the new one, we just as recent as last night, starting to ask like feelings also, because feelings, it's like, how do you feel about your actions, behaviors, decisions? Does that actually align with whatever the way you define greatness is? And so that your values and so forth. So that's something that we do as a reflection, but
Yeah.
also during the process, as you say, hey, here's this value. Well, let's test that a little bit. Hey, Justin, how are your actions and decisions and behaviors and feelings over the last week? How do they align with that value you just laid out? And if you're like, well, I said my value is this, but everything didn't align with that, then is that really true for you? So it's like that's
Yeah.
a great, so it's a great like way of assessing a specific value both in the moment but also in terms of retrospective.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I'm curious, if somebody is basically living against their values, do you believe they could actually even be happy? Like, can they actually enjoy their life if they're living against their sort of intrinsic values at that time?
I mean, happiness, that's a big one too. I mean, it's more as I find and you read, it's more of a decision than anything
Yeah.
else, right? To decision to be happy and being content in your moment. But I don't think you'll be fulfilled if you're not fulfilling those values in some way. If you're just crushing it, that's my whole point about like bringing together success and purpose. And I think people are somewhere on the spectrum of each of those. Some people are like 99% success focused, maybe 1% driven by purpose and your values, and some people are more the other way, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
and I try not to judge that because I do know people that are like, hey, I want to maximize my income so that I can actually afford vacations with my family and I can afford to retire early. It's like that's a different, it's success to actually serve those values downstream. I find that when you can blend those things, you're
Hmm.
going to create more fulfillment in the moment, like what Poe Bronson talks about in his one of his books is like not making fu money. It's like I'm going to go on, I'm going to make all this money, and now I can do it. Versus actually blending that sense of values in your day to day now, which is hard. Most people have struggled to do that.
Yeah, well, because most of the systems that we, grow up and work in, they're not set up to make that easy or encourage that necessarily. So it takes a lot of effort to um, either find the systems or find the place where, or find the courage, the strength to live that way. And I think that's why your work and your book is so necessary, is to teach that and bring that of like, hey, it doesn't matter what your role is, wherever, you got to live in alignment with your values. And that's what really being kind of the leader is, right? Is to not follow just, well, here's what you're supposed to do. And yeah, and
Yeah,
to do what's in alignment for you, for me, for whoever, and not just do what our parents did, right?
yeah, I would say two things. One, which is, our work is helping build great leaders from the inside out. It's like before you can lead people, you need to figure out how to lead yourself. And it starts with identifying what your most important values are and then building your external brand, setting your goals, making sure your decisions, actions, and behaviors and feelings align with that. But the other point I want to make is, and part of the reason why I've gone down this path is that for me, finding out a job and a career was like reading books like What Color Is Your Parachute? If you remember that
Mm.
book,
Oh
probably like
yeah.
a trillion editions. But it's really around finding skill fit and like, and competency fit. It's like to me, it misses something absolutely fundamental, and that's like the sense of fulfillment. And maybe there is some of it in there, but there definitely isn't like oh, I like to do this, but it's like, well, there's a layer below that's below the ocean, that's really, below like what's inside of you, which is what are your most important values, and finding a way to live those out. 'Cause I think that's totally missing in terms of the way people explore careers these days.
Yeah, and I think that's starting to shift, and I think you're part of it. I want to be part of that shift where it's not just like, well, what are you good at and what's going to make money and provide value for ultimately shareholders, but what's going to provide value to my life, to the people I connect with, and things like that. Because yeah, just being good at something doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it. Like I don't know, I'm thinking of like the John Wick, like that guy is really good at killing people. And the beginning of the, spoiler alert, but there's been like four movies, but the beginning of the movie, he wants to not be a killer anymore because he's like found love. He's like, I'd rather be a lover. I have like this great woman I've met, and she got me a puppy. And but something then happens, and then when we get four movies of, he ends up going back to killing people, but he's not happy about it. He's not fulfilled. He's like doing it because that's just what he does. And I don't think we need to just do something just because that's what we do because we're good at it. I think we can find that, well, what's fulfilling. And because honestly, sometimes things get boring when we're really good at it, because it's just like, what's the point? It's the challenge, right? It's there's no story. It's if it's just like, well, I win. If you win the game every time, there's not really much joy in playing, right? If you there's no chance of losing.
Oh, I appreciate the Keanu Reeves reference and didn't realize that was his transition from being the heartthrob into being the killer and then going for the John Wick series. But
At least that's my take.
yeah, and to your point, I mean, winning is enjoyable. I'm a competitive person. I enjoy getting the wins, but the how really matters. It's like anchoring it to my values, doing it in a way that's fair, doing it in a way that's fun, doing it in a way that's not like, you know, squeezing at the margins like the New England Patriots have done to win titles and so forth. It's like the how really matters to me in terms of living that. That's the whole success with the values piece again.
Yeah. Any last thoughts on this topic of kind of like navigating that in between space? I know for me, I'm really picking up on the values, and our own stories and other people's stories can help guide us into figuring out what that is, and that can kind of basically be maybe a bit of the rudder or the way to tell like which direction we want to start going in. Any last thoughts on how to handle these sort of transitory times in our life? I swear I know how to speak English. Even though I do speak. I was amazed that you lived a year in Switzerland as a kid. I thought that was, I couldn't believe you
No,
went through that.
that was a whole nother experience. But yeah, I'd say just like in terms of a final thought is the way I think about greatness, and I'm working on this is recently as last night, is to me, it's having the bravery to live a life and a career that's it has a sense of purpose threaded within it. So to me, that's the point, is just like, and I learned this from one of the people that I've been working with, is like going after greatness requires that sense of bravery. So it's like going after something that's not just because it looks good on your resume because you can do it, but actually there has that sense of fulfillment in line with your values, which requires that sense of bravery.
I love that. Very well said. And thank you so much for being on the show. If you do want to connect with Darren, you can find him at thesavageleader.com/values. That's probably the best place to connect with him first, just go to thesavageleader.com/values. And I believe you're also on social media at the Savage Leader. Is that, I believe that's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Connect on LinkedIn. TheSavageLeader.com is our website. We put up a values exercise to help you start to get to think through those values. If you want to check that out, TheSavageLeader.com/values, and love connecting on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I feel like this must have been the perfect topic because we didn't actually, agree on talking about something related to values, but that was the link you sent was something to elicit values, and then that's just what we happened to sort of zero in on. So the perfect topic with the perfect resources. So definitely go check it out. So thanks, Darren, for being on the show, and thanks everybody for listening, and good day. Thanks for tuning in to Engineering Emotions and Energy with Justin Wink, Ph.D. Today's episode resonated with you? Please subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Your feedback not only supports the show, but also helps others find us and start their journey of emotional and energetic mastery. You can also help by sharing this podcast with someone you think will love it just as much as you do. Together, we're engineering more amazing lives.